bids come out, and a lot of people talking about where ETSU is going to play, where Tennessee is going to play. Now, you do the brackets, Howie Schwab, for Fox Sports, but tell me a little bit about this, the science of bracketology, especially at this time of the year. What are the factors that you look into when you're trying to make up a potential NCAA bracket? What do you take into consideration right now?
Well, first of all, Mark, it's nice to be back with you again.
And the feeling's mutual?
It's really interesting because this year is a little even crazier than some other years. Because, well, I take into consideration key wins, especially wins on the road. If you beat a top tier team on the road, it weighs more heavily now. They've changed it so that if you beat a team that's supposedly 1 through 75 on the road, that's in a quadrant 1, and they're doing this quadrant system. That's really interesting, but it's not always easy to justify, in my opinion. So I look at quality wins, bad losses. I judge certain teams based on what I see and give it the eye test in effect. And this year there are so many teams after the top 3. Right now, Villanova, Virginia, and Purdue have distanced themselves. That fourth number 1 is very much up in the air. Right now, I personally have Michigan State there. But certainly the Spartans have had flaws. And the whole situation after the uproar on campus has been a distraction for sure. So we could have intrigue for that fourth number 1 seed. I also think it's really interesting because there are so many teams that are very evenly matched with the resumes. They have some quality wins, some bad losses, and we see upsets all the time in college basketball right now. And so it's very balanced, and I think that leads to a great March Madness and great tournament. The other thing to look for is in these conference tournaments, don't be totally shocked if a team gets hot and comes out of nowhere and steals bids. And then the committee's going to have a really hard time dealing with that.
Well, Howie Schwab, I want to ask you, when you're doing the bracketology, you mentioned how beating top-tier teams on the road, somebody who's 1 for 75, quadrant 1, that's going to help your seeding, that's going to help you make it. But let me ask, in a situation like ETSU, would there be any impact in terms of their seeding in that they played Xavier close on the road but wound up falling by a bucket even though they had a big lead during the game? Or is it just, look, strong moral victories, that's just a loss? How would you gauge something like that in the case of East Tennessee State?
I think you have to consider that a little bit, because that was a heck of a game for them. And Xavier right now is looking as being a first or second seed at the moment. So it becomes interesting, but you can't take too much from any individual game. It's a game, but especially when you don't end up winning it. But I think that you look at that and say, okay, you know what? They can play with Xavier on the road. I mean, that tells you something about a team. And you have to, when you look at teams from quote-unquote other conferences, and when I say other conferences, I take the last, let's say, 11 through 16 are mostly going to be teams from conferences conferences that only get one bid into the tournament. So if you take those teams and you compare resumes, the fact that East Tennessee State plays Xavier tough should lead a little bit more favorably than compared to, let's say, Louisiana or Charleston or Ryder or Wagner or any of those teams.
Now, so
because they haven't necessarily played Xavier, and they haven't necessarily almost beaten Xavier. So,
would you actually hold? Yeah, no, I would be curious. Would you actually hold for an ETSU more prestige in losing to Xavier by 2 than, say, beating a Savannah State, which may wind up making the NCAA tournament?
yes, I would.
Okay.
Because Xavier is clearly a 2 to 3 seed in this tournament. Savannah State, even if they made the tournament, would be a low 16.
Sure.
And maybe struggling to finish 500 overall. So, no, I think the Xavier the Xavier game is clearly a better situation than State beating a Savannah State.
We're talking to Howie Schwab, bracketologist with Fox Sports. I know last year 9 conferences got multiple bids. Earlier in the decade, as many as 13 did. How many do you foresee right now conferences getting multiple bids into the NCAAs?
Well, the last one I did last night, we can go through this very quickly. SEC and ACC. ACC will have the most. SEC, Big 12, Big East. Then you have Big 10, Pac-12. And I think the Mountain West could have 2 with Boise State, Nevada. The AAC will have 3 right now with Cincinnati, Wichita State, and Houston. And then, which one am I forgetting? There's one other one with 2. Oh, my.
Conference USA?
No. I only have Middle Tennessee State getting it. Western Kentucky is an interesting case given what they did down at the Bahamas. But I think Western Kentucky right now would need to win the conference tournament. And then Middle Tennessee would be an interesting situation. Would they be able to steal a bid? Maybe. For Coach Davis, I think it would be good to just win the conference tournament and not let it go into the committee's hands. They have some losses that don't help them. They have a few quality wins, but I don't know that stacks up against a power conference team that gets so many more opportunities. And I know that may seem unfair, but that's the reality of this thing.
Well, we find that the major conferences obviously dominate the NCAA tournament, and being Southern Conference fans, we can remember when Appalachian State and Davidson got left out and they wound up going to other conferences, perhaps because of that. Howie Schwab, bracketologist for Fox, he right now has his number 1 seeds, has Villanova, Virginia, and Purdue. No surprises there. Possibly Michigan State. And I did want to ask, though, because I'm always intrigued by the mid-majors. I find them to be very, that's one of the beauties of college basketball, that you have, theoretically, 351 teams all playing at a D1 level. Now, in a case of just looking at the Southern Conference, a Wofford, which has defeated 2 ACC teams this year, North Carolina and Georgia Tech.
Yep.
Yeah, now, any chance that perhaps a Wofford could get an at-large bid if they didn't make the, and if they didn't win the SoCon tournament, or flip side, if an ETSU, which is on a 15-game winning streak and has dominated the conference, could get an at-large bid if, let's say, they fell to Wofford in the SoCon final?
I think East Tennessee State would be considered for an at-large. Wofford, I think, has too many losses in between league games and a couple of non-league games I would say East Tennessee State would be on the board and considered. But it's tough to say because if you take, let's say, some teams I have on the bubble right now, like an SMU, like a Washington, now suddenly like a Notre Dame, and you look at the quality wins that any of those schools put up. SMU beat Arizona. SMU beat Wichita State.
Sure.
Notre Dame beat Wichita State. Washington beat Kansas, USC, and now Arizona State. I mean, does East Tennessee State have those kind of quality wins on their resume? I don't think so. So it becomes challenging for the committee to say, hey, this team was great in the regular season, got beat at the last second in a conference tournament, let's say. Let's say Wofford beats East Tennessee in a buzzer beater. Well, you're that close to winning the game, and yet it may not be good enough. It's kind of crazy, but that's the reality right now with so many power conferences getting so many bids. I mean, a team like Missouri, a team like Arkansas right now is on the fence, in my opinion. Arkansas's got several wins because they have so many opportunities, like so many tough teams in the SEC. And the SEC is so far improved this year. You know, the last time the SEC had 6 teams in the tournament was 2008. It's a decade ago.
Did not
That's
know
only
that.
6 teams. Think about it. This year they're going to get 7, 8, 9. I mean, it's incredible. So give the SEC credit. I mean, the other thing that's amazing, Marky, is college basketball this year has had so many surprise teams. Auburn, Tennessee. Tennessee was picked 13th in the conference
Sure.
preseason poll. You have Ohio State. You have Clemson. You have Texas Tech. I mean, these stories are incredible. They were not expected to do anything. Ohio State was preseason 9th in the Big Ten plus. I mean, it's incredible. And these coaches have done super jobs. The Chris Spears, the Rick Barnes, the Bruce Pearl, etc. I mean, Chris Holtman, formerly at Gardner Webb. It's incredible, and that's why I think the tournament this year is going to be great. The other thing I want to add is Villanova, Virginia, and Purdue, the top seeds, they've been beaten.
Mm-hmm.
On a given day, they can be had. I mean, realistically, Villanova doesn't want to ever see Butler in a draw.
Mm-hmm.
That's their kryptonite, apparently. But Virginia lost to West Virginia, gave up 68 points. That's the most they've given up all year. And their defense is incredible. Purdue could have lost to Michigan. Purdue could have lost a couple other games. So, it's going to be interesting.
Why do you have Tennessee as a 4 seed? Why do you think the Vols fit in there?
I actually was torn between a 3 and a 4 for them. And they could move up still. Beat Kentucky, they might move up. I think right now, though, part of it is based on when I judge them against other teams. The fact that they've gotten some quality wins, I give them a ton of credit. I mean, certainly down in Bahamas, they played very, very well, and that was a telltale sign of things to come. And I think Rick Barnes is right up there for Coach of the Year nationally.
I think you may be onto something there, as you say. Yeah.
And unfortunately, he may not even be Coach of the Year in his own conference because of Bruce Pearl.
Yes. I mean, and people are shocked. I know by what Tennessee picked, as you said, 13th, and now one of the leaders in the SEC, as well as, Auburn, one of the great surprise teams of college basketball, as you mentioned, Howie Schwab. Yeah.
Auburn, I think Auburn is as big a surprise because I think when you lost the two players, Wiley and Purifoy, the expectation level was pretty down, and yet they changed the philosophy. They went small ball, they're quick, they hit a lot of threes, and they've been great. And I'm happy for Bruce Pearl.
We're happy, Howie Schwab, that you called in and joined me today to talk about bracketology. And I'm happy that as a little kid, I was able to buy those football action magazines you used to write for because I thought it was tremendous writing from back in the day and always loved it. Was even looking through some of the older ones before the Super Bowl yesterday. So, Howie Schwab for his trivia, for him for his bracketology for Fox, but the man can also write a little bit as well from back when. It's always nice to talk to you. We'll be back with some ideas. What do teams have to do to go to the Super Bowl next year? Greg Rosenthal of NFL.com had some ideas. I'll talk about them when we return on Tri-City Sports Now. Well, thank you for calling me up.